Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, it is my pleasure to open this virtual event on strengthening non-state actor commitments for biodiversity in the context of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm delighted to be co-hosting this event together with the governments of Egypt and China in their roles as our convention, Conference of the Parties, COP14, as well as COP15 presidencies. Today's agenda is a very timely and important to the discussions under the convention's intergovernmental process on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The role that non-state actors play in supporting country efforts is critical to determine the nature and extent of biodiversity loss, while at the same time co-creating solutions to shift away from loss and shape a positive relationship with nature. Leaders from governments, as well as subnational and non-state actors, can reinforce each other and together change the pace of action. We must garner the ambition, action, and support of non-state actors, including subnational and local authorities, business and finance sectors, civil society, and indigenous peoples and local communities to shape and implement the provisions of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Today, during the 5th United Nations Environment Assembly, our panelists and speakers will showcase their commitments for biodiversity and demonstrate connections between biodiversity and sustainable development goals. To frame our event, I welcome Her Excellency Yasmin Fouda, Minister of Environment of Egypt, as well as His Excellency Huang Ruqing, Minister of Ecology and Environment of China, for their remarks.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests. In 2018, as the president of COP14, together with the COP15 president, we spearheaded the Sharm el-Sheikh Tukimang Action Agenda for Nature and People as a commitment platform to raise ambition and action to support the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This action agenda aims to promote action to reverse the nature loss and raise public awareness about the risks of nature loss for people, planet, and the economy. There are important three main messages that I would like to deliver today. First of all, we cannot deal with the biodiversity and nature in isolation from climate change and land. And in that respect, Egypt, through its president, has launched the Mission Initiative for the synergies between the Rio Convention, the climate change, the biodiversity, and the land degradation, for more collective, universal action in that regard. Secondly, it's important to strengthen the engagement with the key economic sector to help address the recommendations that were derived from the report of the IPBES on nature loss and try to think of modalities and approaches for transformation that should be in harmony with nature. Thirdly, the engagement of the business and financial sector, the subnational governments, local authorities, civil society, youth, academia, women, and most of all, local communities, to be part of that conversation and to work towards the movement in harmony with nature by 2050. As president of COP14, I would like to invite you for your commitment and to recognize the joint actions that has been taken for the action agenda. We have a chance and a unique opportunity in order to shift into more actions to avoid nature loss and to start and to try to restore resilience and safeguard the natural asset of our planet, especially within this critical time that the world is facing of COVID-19. We all have a collective journey to transform our economies, our financial systems, our food system, and to reset once again our relation with nature, to be in harmony with nature for our well-being and for the sustainability of our planet. Thank you.
尊敬的雅思明、福尔德女士，尊敬的伊丽莎白·穆雷马女士，女士们、先生们、朋友们，我很荣幸代表中华人民共和国生态环境部生物多样性公约第15次缔约方大会东道国和主席国参加此次的会议。人与自然是生命共同体，人类必须尊重自然、顺应自然、保护自然。生物多样性是人类永续发展的血脉和根基，关系地球家园的未来。当前生物多样性正面临严重的危险。第5版的全球生物多样性展望表明，爱知生物多样性目标实现不容乐观，遏制全球生物多样性丧失任重道远。2020年，中国政府在全力抗击新冠肺炎疫情的同时，积极参与全球的生物多样性治理，稳步推进 COP15 筹备工作。习近平主席多次发出聚首昆明、共商生物多样性保护大计的诚挚邀请。上个月国务院副总理韩正在一个星球视频峰会上提出确保 COP15 取得积极成果的倡议。政府高层的亲自推动，体现了中国政府与国际社会共同努力，成功举办一届具有里程碑意义大会的强烈意愿和坚定的决心。在习近平生态文明思想的指引下，中国的生物多样性保护工作取得了积极的进展。中国创造性地提出并建立了生态保护红线制度，初步划定的生态保护红线面积占到陆域国土面积的25%以上，绝大部分重要物种和重要生态系统得到了有效的保护。卫星监测数据还表明2000年至2017年，全球新增的陆地面积中，有25%以上来自中国，贡献居全球的首位。2009年到2019年，中国完成造林面积7130.7万公顷，是同期全球增长最多的国家。中国全面加强长江水生生物保护，实行了为期10年的禁渔计划。海洋伏季休渔制度实施范围占中国海域面积的比例达到了72%。中国还注重发挥企业、民间组织和公众的力量，多家企业签署协议，加入到全球森林贸易网络 GBF&SDGs。2017年，23家中国民间机构共同发起了社会公益保护地联盟，配合推进生态文明建设，公众生物多样性保护的意识也在显著提升。中国有5亿人坚持手机种树，过去3年累计种植和养护的真实数目达到了1.2亿棵，种植面积超过了140万亩。2018年，埃及、中国与生物多样性公约秘书处共同发起了沙姆沙伊赫到昆明 人与自然行动议程。此后中国积极推进行动议程的实施，举办各种研讨会，加强沟通交流，广邀各方参与。在此我呼吁广大非国家主体利益攸关方共同应对挑战，积极响应行动议程，为建设人与自然和谐共生的地球生命共同体贡献更大的力量。女士们、先生们、朋友们 ，COP15将在中国的昆明举办。大会将通过兼具雄心和务实的2020年后全球生物多样性框架，对未来10年乃至更长时间的全球生物多样性治理作出规划。我期待大会顺利达成具有里程碑意义的成果文件，推进向2020年后全球生物多样性治理更加公正、合理、各尽所能的方向前进。预祝本次会议圆满成功，期待我们相聚昆明的 COP15。谢谢大家。
Thank you to our esteemed co-presidencies and founders of the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming Action Agenda for Nature and People. Action is indeed growing. We recognize those who have already made commitments into the action agenda and inspire others to commit and showcase their actions. Let me also welcome one of our co-chairs for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework process, Mr. Basil Van Havre, to equally provide his views for our event. Welcome, Basil.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My co-chair, Francis Ogwal, wanted to deliver these remarks along with me. However, he isn't able to join me today due to a personal emergency. So instead, I will speak for both of us. So far, we completed regional and thematic consultation, and we're now entering a key phase in the process during which the two subsidiary bodies will provide us with advice. In terms of timeline, it is difficult for me to provide you with a precise schedule, as we adopted a stepwise approach in response to the uncertainty caused by the ongoing pandemics. This approach requires parties to assess each step before deciding on the next. But let me assure you that we're fully aware of the urgency of making progress and the importance of completing our work quickly. Now turning to today's subject. One of the 13 principles provided by COP14 to guide our work is that the post-2020 framework should be a framework for all. This means an overarching whole of government framework, a framework for all of humanity. It is clear that one of the challenges of the previous framework was it was seen, despite the efforts of many, as a framework of the CBD focal point. At the first meeting of the open-ended working group, we heard very clearly that parties wanted to ensure that there is an appropriate place at the table for subnational government. This has led to the creation of the Edinburgh Declaration. But how do we turn this excellent starting point into measurable commitment and ensure improved transparency and responsibility? We know that in order to be successful, we need the CBD focal point. We need the whole of government approach. We need participation of subnational governments and business. We need engagement of civil society, women and girls, youth, and last but not least, indigenous people and local communities. We all need to work together. But how can we make that a reality? First, we need to enable all to engage in the debate. Recently, we created a new open stakeholder forum, which allows us to hear from non-party stakeholders and parties alike. The first edition attracted a lot of interest, with 1,100 registrations and more than 100 interventions. We need to build a planning, reporting, and review system that is open, This means that it will be able to easily accommodate non-state actors' commitments, where we can account for the commitments, such as Walmart's to protect and restore 50 million acres of land and 2 million square kilometers of sea and land. My vision, and I hope it will be shared by the COP15 presidency, is that when the final package is gavelled in Kunming, we will see on the podium not only the presidency and lead negotiator, but also representatives from the private sector, subnational governments, and civil society, demonstrating their commitment together. Let me leave you with a few questions to spark a discussion. First, what are the characteristics of goals, milestones, and targets that make them relevant and easy to integrate by non-state actors? I mentioned earlier Walmart's conservation goal. Should others associate themselves with pollution or agri-food system-related goals? How can we enable deeper participation of non-state actors, as well as integrate their commitment and allow them to report in the overall system? And finally, how can we develop a framework that can be readily integrated with others, like climate, to facilitate the transition of economic systems? Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I wish you a fruitful deliberation.
Thank you, Mr. Van Havre. You have posed very useful questions, which we will address during the discussion segment. For now, permit me to invite our moderator of this session to join me. And our moderator, Mr. Manuel Vidal, is the global leader of climate and energy for WWF. Many may recall his leadership and his role at the UN Framework Climate Change Convention COP14, then as the Minister of Environment of Peru, where he organized, among others, the first Action Day and worked with the French presidents in the lead up to the COP15 of the climate change. His experience on non-state actor agenda is very valuable. Mr. Vidal, I thank you for joining us and sincerely invite you to continue with the moderation of our panel session. Over to you, Manuel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you for your kindly words. Yes, I am more than happy to moderate this session that it is about strengthening non-state actors' commitment for biodiversity in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And I am happy because I think that we are in a time in which we are recovering hope in the process. We are in the time in which we are getting more optimistic on what we can achieve and all what we can do. We have heard you, Elizabeth, we have heard the Minister of Egypt, China, and also Basil as a co-chair, encouraging non-state actors in being part of this collective journey, as it has been mentioned by the Minister of Egypt. Also the call from the China minister to have all the non-state actors coming into this collective effort, because that is a key word. It is a collective effort. We cannot achieve our objective. It is not by a collective way of acting all together, all looking for the same objective with the same vision and with a strong mechanism to achieve it. So the time it is perfect. Let me put you all in context. We are organizing this event as part of UNEA 5, that it is about the role of nature to achieve the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So it is for sure fitting with the main objective of UNEA 5. And in relation to where are we in strengthening these non-state actors for the nature agenda and for the biodiversity agenda, let me remind to you all first that in 2018, in Sharm el-Sheikh, as part of COP14, all the parties launched for the first time ever what it is called the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming Action Agenda. So we have already made our first strong step 2 years ago. And more than 2 years after that, we are in a year 2021 in which we should take a strong decision. The world is expecting to have a super 2021 year because not only of the climate, a strong outcome that we know the climate community is going to achieve, but also because of nature. So this is the year in which we are going to take decisions for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And also, we are in a time in which many of the non-state actors, including the business sector, but also civil society, indigenous people, and many other, the academia, among some others, they have already shown to be committed to this agenda. So we have in front of us a strong commitment and good ways to move this agenda forward. Also, the subnational governments are moving their agendas to bring nature into the top priority of their actions. And also, in the last weeks, we have seen how much we are working in developing the narrative to strengthen the relation between nature and the economy. That is a key element. Some days ago, it has been released what it is called the Gupta Review, that it has underlined the importance of putting nature in the top of our economic decision. For sure, we're in a time in which we should keep that discussion in a permanent way. It could be through some kind of commission, but who knows, to trying to develop step by step that narrative. That is a key element that could help countries to mainstream that importance of nature in the economy domestically into their political decisions. And also, we know that we cannot achieve SDGs if we are not able to address nature loss. That is a key element. So there are no excuses. We are talking in UNEA 5, in which it is about SDGs. So if we are planning to address SDGs in an effective way, it should be by addressing and by reversing nature loss. And my last point is that more than 88 leaders from around the world in September, they signed a commitment that it is called the Nature Pledge. So we have political will. And for sure, that political will, it has been reinforced by the will of Egypt and China, the co-presidencies of COP14 and COP15. So the time is fantastic. And that is what we are going to talk about. So for today, what we are planning it is to connect dots, to connect all those elements and to identify the huge opportunity that we have in front of us. So let me finish this opening by encouraging you to be part of this effort, to be part of this collective journey. It is the only way. Look, friends, we are going to achieve something strong by the CBD 15, I am sure. And for its implementation, we should include all the actors. It is not possible to implement any international decision if it is not to work through and by the different actors and to work not only globally, but also to implement domestically. So that is what we are going to talk about. So before moving into the panel, some housekeeping rules. So I am going to ask all the panelists to please keep their camera off until I call them to open it when it is the session. Also to the audience, you can use the Q&A format of this software to put your questions or your comments. The organizers are going to channel your questions to me, and I am going to transmit it to the panelists or to the people who is going to make the reflections. So we are ready for the panel. We will have 4 women, 4 strong leaders that are going to talk about of what I have just mentioned: commitment, engagement, collective effort, and how to make nature one of our top global and domestic priorities. So let me ask, I would like to ask Marina Grossi to open her camera to introduce her. She is the president of the Brazilian Business Council for Sustainable Development. This business council, they have convened the Brazilian Business Commitment for Biodiversity, that it is a coalition of 14 companies. So I would like to ask you, Marina, can you tell us about what is the criteria that you used to bring these 14 companies to join this coalition? And what are the kind of commitments that this coalition is taking, and how much they are contributing to the nature and biodiversity agenda, and more than that, also to the SDGs? So please, Marina, you have the floor.
Manuel, I believe Marina is having some technical difficulties at this moment. I would suggest that we move to the next speaker and then bring Marina at the end once the technical challenges have been resolved.
Good. Thank you to notice me. Yeah. Sorry because of these kind of technical problems that are very common in this time of virtual meetings. Okay, so let's turn into our next panelist that will talk about passion for biodiversity. So Marina, you are there now. Have you already sorted the technical problems? I can't hear you, but please, the organizer, also tell me if it is just myself or
okay,
what is with the same problem.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Marina.
Thank you. Sorry for this technical problem. Well, I was just saying that I'm delightful to be here with you and representing the business sector in Brazil. Brazil, as you all know, is a key country on the debate of biodiversity. We contains in Brazil nearly 20% of the world's biodiversity, and it's also the country that has the largest diversity of land species on the planet. We also, and you said, you highlighted this, Manuel, and all the previous speakers, the importance of the interconnection between all the issues on SDGs. And we have three special roles to play globally. One is in water, food, and also as climate supplier. And that's why it's so important to have a meeting like this with no actors. And BCST Brazil, Brazilian Business Council, which the institution that I am in charge of, is based in Rio since '97. And since '98, we have the Tema Chamber on Biodiversity to discuss the engagement of business and the commitment that business has to do for these important issues that Brazil has a very comparative it's a big achievement for Brazil and also for the business in Brazil. So we have this Tema Chamber that discuss this, and also in 2006, we have representing the business sector in Brazil in Curitiba, where we held the COP of biodiversity. And that was the first time that business has an important role to play, because at COP8, mentions for the first time in its decisions the imminent need for involvement of the business sector. So, and I very much like the link that we do in climate and also biodiversity, but because I think it's for us in BCSG Brazil, it's the two main important Tema chambers that we have, and the interconnection between both are very clear for us. So since then, we made great progress together with our companies. We have about 60 big companies representing around 45% of the GDP in Brazil. But the point is not only understanding the risks and opportunities related to interconnection between business and biodiversity, but also understanding that we can achieve even more if you connect with other actors in the territory. Can you please show the first slide, please, the other one? So Manuel was saying about commitments, and we launched it in October 2019, the Brazilian business commitment to biodiversity, emphasized the importance of biodiversity and ecosystem services for companies. This document is composed by 9 goals, but all those 9 goals has its fundamental principles on the conservation and sustainable use of natural resources. Can you show the next slide, please? So collectively, the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Collectively, we join forces with global partners. No, the previous one. We join forces with global partners such as the Global Partnership for Business and Biodiversity, and also Business for Nature, to amplify the voice of business and inspire further actions and encourage the adoption of a transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework at COP15. 2020 has emphasized that our survival is directly connected to preserve and evaluating our natural resources. I think that's more clear for globally, it's more clear, and for sure in Brazil as well. The interdependence between all those issues and between biodiversity, climate change, health, and governance are even clear with this with the COVID-19 and with this time that we are still facing. But we truly believe that we can work towards and get more and improve this agenda with this connection and showing how to achieve 2030 with harmony between production and conservation. Deforestation is a key issue, and that's one link that I can relate. Climate change and also biodiversity is a key issue for Brazil on emissions, because 40% of the Brazilian emissions is because of deforestation, and illegal deforestation has a very crucial role to play on this. So we also, adding for this commitment that I just showed to you, we also made a statement launched in July 7th last year, that we show that production and conservation can be harmonized, and business are already doing both together. So it's a very well succeeded statement that we did. And we launched this with 4 more important institutions, such as the Brazilian Global Compact, the Agribusiness Association, the Forest Association, also Soil Association. And we also we count by now with 92 CEOs' signatures for this statement. So it's also a statement that highlights the importance of biodiversity and climate change. Let me end my speech saying some data in Brazil that in a study that we did, showing that a total of up to $17 billion can be generated from nature-based solutions by 2030 in the country. GDP can also have a significant growth with the implementation of those practices, reaching an accumulated total gain of 600 billion by 2030, and a total of 4 billion in additional agriculture productivity by 2030, while recovering 12 million hectares of pastures. If we can link this to the nature-based solutions that also has a study by WBCSD showing that 37% of the Paris Agreement can be reached, can be accomplished by the nature-based solutions. So it's some very important thing to have in mind and to make the link of. Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you, Marina. Marina, let me ask something important. You know that in these efforts, I think it is very valuable to have this kind of coalitions, in this case in Brazil. And I have seen this list of elements, and one of those, it is this mitigation hierarchy, that it is a key element. Because we are in a time in which we are discussing how can we strengthen the link in between climate and nature. And for that, to identify how can we address our objective to net zero or to nature positive, it is a key element. So the mitigation hierarchy, it is one of those key ways or key mechanisms or key tools to move us towards the objective. So could you, in 1 minute, please, tell us more about this mitigation hierarchy? How are you thinking on this mitigation hierarchy in case of your coalition?
Yes, I think it's more clear now, this link, as you said. So one thing is important, it's traceability in all the supply chain. I think it's a challenge for us if we want to think about mitigation. How can we really have traceability and really, because we have in Cebedis only big companies, we have 60 big companies, but we also have to think about the supply chain. I think that's the big challenge for us on climate change and biodiversity as well. So really to take the supply chain into account and really measure incentives. And we have here the financial sector that's also a key, have a key role to play on that. I think that's one important thing that we can move forward. And also think about the opportunities. I think that's, we are in a transforming time, and opportunities has to be really linked, are more clear for business sector right now.
Thank you, Marina. Supply chain, it is a key element, and probably we are going to discuss more later. So I would like to ask you to turn off your camera to move into the next panelist. So we are going to turn into fashion for biodiversity. And we have Mrs. Geraldine Vallejo. She's the Sustainability Program Director at Kering. You were among the first business entity to provide a commitment to the action agenda, and that is key. Congratulations because of that. So Geraldine, could you tell us about Kering's biodiversity commitment and why you took that decision to be part of this action agenda?
But first, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present, to share with you what we are doing at Kering. So, as you said, Manuel, we are a global luxury group. And at Kering, we are convinced that we need to invest in and rebuild our natural capital. And there's never been a moment more important in time to do it. Our current COVID crisis is a tragic reminder, not only of what happens when we destroy and degrade biodiversity, but also when we do not recognize the risk associated with doing that. So what is the link between luxury and biodiversity? We have an important relationship to biodiversity because we depend on it for raw materials like cotton, leather, cashmere, and wool to make our beautiful products. So it just makes sense for the luxury and fashion industry to change our relationship around biodiversity and how we source our raw materials. It's just a question of resilience. In other words, when we protect nature, we protect our own supply chains for the future too. And so our approach is that we can be part of the solution for biodiversity and climate. We can help transform agriculture to have a positive impact on nature. And we strongly believe that businesses should not undermine the importance of natural capital, that is our insurance for life, and also for a thriving society and successful businesses. At Kering, we've been deeply committed to understanding what is natural capital and how we depend on it, what to do to protect it. 10 years ago, we set up our environmental profit and loss account, so EPNL, we call it EPNL, that provided the backbone for measuring our environmental impact, understanding where are the hotspots and globally and to take action. Thanks to the EPNL, we increased tremendously traceability in the supply chain, which is an important point I mentioned by Marina just now. And we know that over 90% of our impact on nature is in our supply chain, and that land use change represents 30% of the impact. So with this knowledge, we have implemented programs and partnerships on the ground for many years to improve sustainable sourcing of raw materials. But last year, which was supposed to be the big year of biodiversity, with COP15, we published our biodiversity strategy that brings this all together with our overarching goal, because ultimately we are aiming to have a net positive impact on nature by 2025 by protecting 1 million hectares of critical habitats and by regenerating 1 million hectares in the fashion supply chain landscapes. And these 2 million hectares represent 6 times of overall sourcing footprint. Our biodiversity strategy follows the framework recommended by the Science Based Targets Network, which we are going to learn more later today, because we apply the conservation hierarchy to not only decrease our impact, but also go beyond. So our approach is to avoid, reduce, restore and regenerate, and then transform. And this translates very concretely into how we source our raw materials by buying sources from regions with high risk of deforestation, by using best-in-class certification, and by restoring a landscape wherever possible. We are also committed to net zero through our climate strategy that complements our biodiversity work. So really, climate and biodiversity have to work together, and you've mentioned that already. Our climate approach focuses on where we can deliver positive outcomes through natural climate solutions. And this year, we recently accelerated our commitment with our Regenerative Fund for Nature. So this is where I say invest in nature, because through this €5 million fund, we will support a range of programs to expand the use of regenerative agriculture practices for fashion critical materials, like I said, cotton, wool, cashmere, etc. The call of proposal was launched 3 weeks ago for farm-based and field-based organizations in 17 countries. And so this fund is also important to showcase how regenerative agriculture can be used, and we want to catalyze interest and support from the fashion sectors and from other companies as well. And as much as we do for other sustainability topics, we'll be open sourcing the results, measuring it and open sourcing it, because we want to share the results. So as a conclusion, we think it's really an unprecedented moment in time where we know what challenges we have to face, but we also have the solution. And I cannot support more what you said earlier. This is by necessity a joint effort and really a collaborative effort.
Thank you, Geraldine. And wow, you have presented many good elements. Probably the most interesting it is the combination in between address biodiversity degradation or loss and luxury. Because when we think about what is the current situation of biodiversity loss, probably it is strongly related to our behavior. And in that sense, luxury, it could be part of that bad behavior. So the point is, how can we reconcile luxury with biodiversity protection or management? That is a key element, and I am going to ask you something about that. But also you have mentioned supply chain, as Marina did, and that is an interesting element, because by supply chain also you are addressing biodiversity loss mostly in developing countries. And that is interesting because that can connect, also can create benefits for people in developing countries, indigenous people, among some others. The third element, it is clear targets, that I think it is a key element. But the best way to move into clear target, it is also by bringing credibility. And SBTN, it could be that way to bring and to give credibility to your target. And finally, your combination of net zero, so climate and nature. So it is a good combo. It is a good combo. But could you go more deeply in how have you taken that decision to combine luxury with biodiversity, considering that luxury it could be part of that bad behavior of people that have created the current situation of biodiversity? So what are those elements to reconcile luxury and biodiversity?
Now, what is specific to luxury is that we use a lot of natural materials as opposed to fast fashion that use more synthetic materials. And so we really depend on the good health of nature. So we use the finest wool, the softest cashmere, etc. So we really recognize the value of nature. And luxury is, so as I said earlier, to have a successful business, to be able to continue to have beautiful, to make beautiful products, we have to protect nature. We have to regenerate nature, because protecting now is not enough at the pace at which it's declining. Plus, so this is both ethics imperative and a business imperative. And luxury is also about heritage. It's the most, so protecting and preserving heritage, and the most important heritage of our planet is nature.
Thank you, Geraldine. There is an additional question, but probably we are running a bit out of time, that it is how can we engage shareholders into your efforts? So how can we convince shareholders not to invest in companies if they are reporting less growth for nature? Some 30 seconds to answer that. How are you convincing investors to be part of your effort and to not invest if it is not a sustainable target and initiative?
also investors. So I see two important things. I believe very much in the power of collaboration and collective actions. So for instance, we are part of important coalitions such as Act for Nature International that generated more than 250 in biodiversity commitments signed by CEOs. We're also part of One Planet Business for Biodiversity, which is a coalition led by Danone on scaling up regenerative agriculture. And we also started the Fashion Pact, which is a coalition engaging more than 30% of the fashion sector on climate, biodiversity, and ocean. And these coalitions have a very important voice on the external stage by showing corporate leadership and also to reassure investors and finance that corporate actors are ready to embrace biodiversity. So that's one thing. The other thing is to speak the language of investors by natural capital accounting and by using metrics that they know about. So that's why for us, EPNL, Environmental Profit and Loss Account, was so powerful, because at the end, it talks in euros. And so we can talk to investors, CFOs, they make the link with usual business.
Thank you, Geraldine. And please, could you turn off your camera? And thank you for your participation. And this last question that I made I channeled from the audience, and also we are very happy to have almost 300 people listening this important event that I am sure you are enjoying as we are. That it is amazing that we are talking about this in the beginning, early this 2021, in which many good things could be done. So the last question to Geraldine, it was related to investors. So it is a time to switch into finance, because to protect and restore biodiversity needs to have financing activities and investment. That is critical. So we have Vicky Benjamin, CEO of Carner Blue Capital. And could you talk, Vicky, about how your firm is committed to biodiversity? Could you also give us some elements to trying to take some lessons of your experience that it would be applied to this nature action agenda?
Absolutely. Thank you, Manuel, and distinguished panelists. I really appreciate and welcome the opportunity to be here. As we all recognize, the world is facing a biodiversity funding and investment gap that threatens our current way of life. Largely due to market inefficiencies related to a lack of information and transparency by underlying stakeholders, the cost of biodiversity use has historically been borne by society and not equitably allocated to those stakeholders who are responsible for what we believe to be depletive and detrimental activities. In order to eliminate this paradigm, we believe information systems will need to be developed to better measure and monitor biodiversity use and impacts, such that costs can be better managed and assigned to those who are using these valuable resources. Further, cost attribution will most likely result in the necessary retooling of certain high-impact socioeconomic business systems, including food and the extractive industries like oil and gas, metals and mining, and infrastructure, including building and real estate, such that they are less biodiversity intensive and impactful. The resolution of this challenge, including the innovation of information systems and the retooling of business processes, represents a remarkable opportunity for those folks and stakeholders willing to act decisively and swiftly to build a more sustainable and regenerative natural infrastructure. Participants in the finance industry, however, Manuel, now have a chance to support the building of a more inclusive finance and economy. The Biodiversity for Finance Pledge represents a consortium of such finance constituents, issuers, asset managers, and lending institutions united in their respect for biodiversity and the fundamental importance of it to our economies. Signatories of the pledge recognize the need for transformative change in business practices and have agreed to collaborate and share knowledge with each other and others in business. Engage with companies, assess impacts, set meaningful targets, and report publicly to encourage and facilitate transformative business change. As one of the 26 financial institutions from around the globe that launched the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge in 2020, Carter Blue Capital believes that the capital markets can be utilized to manifest material change. KBC's investing methodology incorporates the commitments of the pledge through our 3 business pillars: investing with our values and our underlying shareholders' values, advocating for change, and educating for impact. KBC uses a proprietary bottoms-up research approach to build investment strategies exclusively dedicated to protecting the planet's biodiversity, fostering environmental stewardship, and improving animal welfare. KBC is a UNPRI signatory and actively engages with companies for improvement in their policies. Some of our recent initiatives over the last 4 years have included the elimination of poaching and hunting in the metals and mining industry, the minimization of high drilling operations in the Arctic Circle, and the promotion of replacement, reduction, and refinement of animals in animal testing. KBC's unique approach to driving portfolios of change includes providing timely thought leadership to help educate investors, companies, and consumers alike on the impacts of biodiversity through publishing white papers, delivering podcasts, and writing monthly blogs. More importantly, we are fostering strategic partnerships between financial institutions and technology firms to help develop and implement information systems to better able, measure, and assign biodiversity costs across discrete business operations and stakeholders. We hope through the use of artificial intelligence and remote sensing, for example, that we can increase transparency and accountability and drive climate and biodiversity stewardship across the private sector. Through this effort, KBC hopes to shift the finance community's perspective to prioritize a healthy and regenerative environment for all humans, animals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Interesting your Finance for Biodiversity pledge and the sequence. Share information, engage, assess, define, and report. I think it is a good combination of a gradual process to bring it more closer to investors and to develop these financial products. And let me ask a couple of things. The first one, it is why we can see that there is a lack of financial products that could focus on address biodiversity loss. And my second element, it is more related to our experience on climate. It has taken some time to move the finance agenda. Fortunately, now I think that we are on track, what it is good. And it is not just about transparency or disclosure, that for sure it is as the baseline, but the point, it is alignment. So in case of climate, our push and our encouragement, it is to have investors aligning their portfolio into the net zero and the 1.5. What could be the alignment when we think about biodiversity for the financial sector or for the development of financial products?
So there was 3 questions there, and I'm going to take them one by one. And now you understand the struggle that we've had. So firstly, as a constituent and a member of the pledge, we in this very deliberate group understand that there's a lack of information, and I think you will agree, Manuel, on the value of biodiversity. Let me just take, for example, the value of pollinators. We could assume, there's been studies that they're worth $10 trillion. That is, if they can be replaced with automation or something else. We don't know that. So we are unable first right now to truly measure the value and the impacts of biodiversity such that metrics can be made that and indicators developed to measure and incorporate these metrics into ESG frameworks or data sets. So if you're able to monetize those and to put them into data sets, you can develop investment strategies. We recognize at Carter Blue, and we recognize across the pledge group, that this process is just beginning, and that we really need to do bottoms-up research on the impacts of companies through basically academic research to build strategies centered around those companies in high impact industries that lead their industries in biodiversity preservation and environmental stewardship. So we are starting out right now, basing our analysis on published policies and impacts that we know of, and working tirelessly, us in the pledge, to engage with data providers and tech firms to develop models to better assess biodiversity impacts such that they can be integrated into investment strategies and companies' self-awareness. So that's the first, I think that answers your first question. It took us at Carter Blue Capital 4 years to develop this data set of responsible policies and procedures by constituents in the high impact industries, including food, infrastructure, and extractive industries. The second question you asked me, I believe, was related to how we see this future panning out. And I would ask you if you could repeat that one more time, just so.
Yes, I made you different questions, and one it was related to how can we develop more financial products to address biodiversity loss, and how can we align. But please take 30 seconds if you can, because we are running a bit out of time.
So part of our strategy is, after developing ways of monitoring stakeholders' underlying impacts, is to be able to, the most important thing in this process is to be able to benchmark companies against each other and engage with them collectively, as the finance constituents would like to do, engage with these companies in a pragmatic and organized approach with those companies that lag behind on deforestation policies and procedures, fishing procedures, palm oil regeneration. We are working collaboratively together to try to monitor impacts, benchmark companies, and then engage in a consortium with those companies that lag behind, hopefully moving business processes across the continuum. It's exciting, and we are it's exciting time, and I can't wait to be able to promote and tell about our progress as we move forward, because we're actively really engaged.
Thank you, Vicky. We will follow what you are working on. And thank you for your time. And please, could you turn off your camera now to introduce our next panelist? Look, in the last 3 interventions, I have mentioned the importance of promoting credibility. And the way to promote credibility in the action agenda, it is by having strong targets, well supported on science, and that can make us able to follow progress, to track progress. And because of that, SBTN, it is a key element. So now we have Erin Billman. She's the Executive Director of Science-Based Target Network. So Erin, could you tell us how much you are promoting that credibility. What are those mechanisms that you are developing to promote this clear definition of strong targets based on science, and how much that could contribute to the action agenda, to the nature action agenda?
Thanks, Manuel, and thank you for WWF's participation in Science-Based Targets Network. WWF is one of the core partners and contributors. We recognize there's widespread agreement among environmental organizations and business groups and scientists on the need for a single unified message for business to provide clarity on how to ensure businesses' efforts are scientifically validated. We are working with the Earth Commission on identifying a safe and just corridor for humanity based on the first ever integrated assessment of the whole Earth system that is now underway by the Earth Commission. And we within Science-Based Targets Network are over 45 partners that are working together to provide that unified message to businesses and cities about what does it mean for you to do your part, for you to do enough to meet the goals of the post-2020 framework and the UN SDGs. Our vision is a global economy in which companies and cities are operating within environmental boundaries on a socially equitable basis, and doing so through the setting of science-based targets to transform their impact. Why science-based targets? Because you can see out there pledges and commitments that sound good, oftentimes are well-intentioned, but unless we have clear time-bound, with a clear baseline, clear metrics for monitoring, ways to review, and consistent, as you heard from Vicky, we can't collectively identify, is it enough? And that is the main need that we're aiming to solve for as a network. Next slide, please. Our contribution, so we believe that for change to happen, we need to be connecting the voluntary action of corporate leaders like Caring and the action that you heard from Geraldine. We need to be connecting that voluntary action to enabling policy. And enabling and engendering stronger voluntary action for nature and climate can in turn enable stronger policy, as well as ensure that we're delivering on the policy commitments being made. And so our contribution is the science-based targets guidance for companies and cities so that they can be taking voluntary action that is enough to meet those goals. I'll leave it there, Manuel, because I know we're short on time.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Erin. Erin, first, this graphic, it is fantastic because you are combining government and companies and cities, because also you have mentioned the subnationals, and that is a key element, and also climate and nature. And probably there could be a third combination that it is global and domestic. No, that is a key element. But moving beyond that, I would like to ask you about this concept of nature positive. SBTN released guidelines with a mitigation hierarchy in which you talk about this concept of nature positive. What does it mean? It is the main objective, and how much we can talk about nature positive when we think about the global biodiversity framework. What important is that element to have a clear and collective vision, as it is the equivalent with the net zero for the climate. So what are you trying to develop with this concept of nature positive? And what do you need from decision makers? Do you need something for decision makers to talk about this nature positive concept?
Mm-hmm. Yes, nature positive. It is the hot topic these days. We are aiming to define what does it mean for a company or city to do its part for an equitable, net zero, and nature positive future. Drilling in particularly on nature positive, What that means is following, as you mentioned before, Manuel, the mitigation hierarchy, and making sure that for a company or a city to have a science-based target for nature, that they are first and foremost avoiding any new degradation, for instance, conversion or deforestation activities in their value chain. Then second, reducing impacts as much as possible. For instance, reducing water use in high impact parts of the value chain. Then restoration and regeneration, as you heard from Geraldine, because there will still be residual negative impacts associated with operations. What actions can you be taking to, for instance, regenerate landscapes in your value chain? You could set a goal of ensuring at least a 10% increase of ecological integrity per square kilometer. And then lastly, there's one step beyond the mitigation hierarchy, which is because we recognize that we need broader systems transformation. And so transformation is the fifth step in that initial guidance that you referred to. And if you haven't already read the initial guidance that we released last fall by Science Based Targets Network, I recommend you do so. But an example there is linking executive compensation to environmental and social performance.
Thank you very much, Erin. So I would like to thank the four panelists. Unfortunately, as for the time, I have channeled some of the questions that we received from the audience, but now it is the time to switch into the reflection of three good friends. So thank you to the panelists, a big applause to you all. And so now let us move to our three reflections from three good friends. Gonzalo Muñoz, that as you know, it is the champion of the action agenda, for the climate action agenda. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, former Minister of the Environment and Energy from Costa Rica. And Neville Ash, Director of UNEP CCMC. So I would like to ask to the three to open your cameras. Hola, Gonzalo. We can switch into Spanish. No? We will No. Okay,
it's fine.
Okay, so we have like 20 minutes, a bit more. And we had thought that I would make like final reflection, but I prefer to have you doing that reflection. So look, we have had a strong panel, really I like it a lot, in which they talk about coalitions, how they organize coalitions, sectors, in a specific and concrete case of fashion, finance and how to develop financial products, and how to promote transparency and credibility by defining targets and the experience of SBT. And I think that is like a good summary of what we have heard. So now the point it is, okay, so let's ground this, because also we are discussing a global biodiversity framework, a post-2020 GBF, in which, as I mentioned, a good step, it has been taken with the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming action agenda. So how can we link what it is happening with this commitment with this effort of the governments of Egypt and China and the Secretariat of the CBD to promote a good exchange, a good share of experience in between what it is happening outside with what we are discussing inside? And Gonzalo, you are the champion of a climate action agenda. So you have all the lessons from the action agenda. Could you tell us, what do you think? Could you give us some reflection on what to do in relation to the nature action agenda based in what we have heard?
Great. Well, thank you, Manuel, and great to see you, Carlos Manuel, Neville. Definitely, and we have heard a lot about this during the previous great panel. This decade of action reaching planetary boundaries started with the COVID-19 crisis. So one of the most important lessons to be learned is that we must pivot towards regeneration and therefore deliver at least transformations to enhance resilience, halt and reverse nature loss, halt the greenhouse gas emissions, of course, therefore achieving the SDGs. And all of this simply by following scientific evidence. So science reminds us the fact that nature loss increases all this human drama, and when it comes to climate change, nature loss increases climate change and vice versa. And vice versa. We must therefore meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and deliver a new goal on biodiversity framework. The so-called nature-based solutions are really fundamental to address both the biodiversity and the climate crisis. And therefore, I would like, if you may allow me, to recognize, of course, the leadership of the People's Republic of China for their leadership under the UN Secretary General as the co-lead country to nature-based solutions at the Climate Action Summit. The power of the nature-based solution was very well captured in the NBS manifesto, and still a reference for both climate and biodiversity agendas. At the same time, in the Climate Action Summit, the President of Chile launched the Ambition Alliance of countries committing to net zero emissions by mid-century or earlier. And this alliance is growing stronger, and it's also very well aligned with the expectations around biodiversity. That's why in this period, with my dear friend and partner Nigel Topping, the high-level champion from the UK, and of course following your historical advice, Manuel, we have created the Race to Zero global campaign to rally leadership and support from all non-state actors for a healthy, resilient, zero carbon recovery that should prevent future threats and also should create decent jobs, greener jobs, and definitely unlock inclusive growth. We also have recently launched the breakthrough targets for different sectors, and for nature positive land use, for example, we aim to have 20% of food supply chain committed to net zero by COP26. This will definitely require nature-based solutions, creating more opportunities for farmers as well as greater resilient innovation. And of course, it should be related to investors aligning their investment portfolio to be net zero and deforestation free. So besides all that Vicky mentioned before, we're looking forward to Task Force of Nature financial disclosure to also help align the financial institutions worldwide. And as also indicated in the NBS manifesto, nature-based solutions inherently address both emissions removals and reduction, as well as enhancing resilience. We also launched the Race to Resilience, this global campaign to catalyze a step change in global ambition for resilience, putting people and nature first. The goal is to create or increase the resilience for 4 billion people by 2030. And non-state actors are all around the world evidencing initiatives of how nature-based solutions, including ecosystemical-based adaptation, are generating opportunities for all the society and the economies. Myself as a farmer, I've seen firsthand where nature's role in low emissions and resilience is strong. And I trust in this 2021 super year with the 3 conventions meeting plan and the Food Summit of the Secretary General, with all of you, the action agenda for people and nature must and will only definitely grow stronger. So in that sense, I recognize the leadership, of course, of Egypt and the long-standing effort to advance the synergies of the 3 Rio conventions, as this can facilitate a systemic approach to the current crisis. We must not miss this opportunity, Manuel. I think that all of us here recognize that, and definitely from our side, we look forward to collaborate in this sense with the Biodiversity Convention to connect all of the topics.
Thank you, Gonzalo. And before moving to Carlos Manuel, let me apologize with all the audience that we have organized this event as a kid party. So first we have the women in one side, and then we have just men. No? So for the future, we will try to see that better. So our apologies. So Carlos Manuel, and thank you, Gonzalo, because you have brought the elements to connect. And sure, those elements are there. Nature-based solutions, land use, race to resilience, food summit. So the point it is to collaborate. So Carlos Manuel, how can we promote that collaboration? Because we know that for many years, we used to be a bit isolated, each to other. No? 2 different communities, the biodiversity in one side and the climate in the other, food probably the third one, oceans in some other. So how can we really how can we bring all those communities together? How can we collaborate? And also, how can we organize for the non-state actors agenda for nature, the economic sector? Because it is clear in climate. You are working in this non-state actors agenda breakthroughs, Gonzalo, in which it is clear you have energy, you have transport, you have cities, you have many land use, among some other topics. But it is not clear how to organize sector for nature. So what do you recommend, Carlos Manuel?
Well, thank you so much, Manuel, and greetings to Nabil and Gonzalo. And two things here are important, Manuel, in order to narrow that kind of gap. One is, using the science, and well, Gonzalo just mentioned it, and Nabil most probably will elaborate more on that. But now we got the science that give us a clear understanding that a coherent, comprehensive approach must be done at the global level, but most importantly, understanding what we need to do at the country level. And as we put the science together, we come to the other element or field, which is as important, which is the economic field. It makes a lot of economic sense to bring them together and to do a holistic, comprehensive approach, because more and more economic evidence is being provided by economic scientists telling us that there is a need to act very quickly, and the cost of not taking action will be extremely higher than taking action right now. So I tend to believe that those two elements are taking part and are working towards the right direction. My concern, Manuel, here is we still believe, I come from a developing country, as you know, and here in the developing countries, we haven't connected dots on how we should manage our natural capital if we compare that on how developing countries are managing the human capital. I don't see any country not putting priorities on education and healthcare. I don't see any country conditioning more ODA for more education or healthcare. And here's where I tend to believe that we got a kind of a big challenge. So the integrated approach at the country level is extremely important, because we got the many different conventions. We got the Rio conventions plus many other environmental conventions. And at the country level, there is not an integrated approach on how we work with them. And that is extremely important, because we work on silos in implementing the convention. That is a key element. We got a focal point for every single convention in many different institutions and agencies, and most probably they don't coordinate talk. And that is a big issue, which is very much associated with other elements that I call the policy incoherence of many of our countries, which take decisions on a sectoral base. And in many cases, this means that we're investing more on activities that damage nature and contribute to climate change than what we invest in reverting, in going towards a net zero emissions or a nature positive environment. And that is a key element. So in order to address those challenges, particularly being more integrated and coherent, I tend to believe that as we have been able to understand that at the bottom line of our unsustainable production and consumption pattern, there is a huge market failure. In the next, there's many reports telling us that we continue socializing negative externalities and we don't reward positive externalities. That means that, we need to shift the tax burden from taxpayers to polluters. That's just an example. And of course, climate change is the best example of market failure. At the same time that we recognize that and deal with that problem, there's another big element, which I call the institutional failure, that generates a lot of incoherence in the overall policy from governments. We work on silos, on agencies. We got an agency for oil and gas or energy, mining, another for nature conservation, another for oceans, another for food production. They work in the same landscapes with the same stakeholders, and they all agree that we need to shift towards a more sustainable consumption and production pattern, but we haven't done those transformation. And in terms of working with non-state actors in the context of the post-2020 biodiversity framework, we need to recognize that we need to move towards an institutional landscape approach. We need to generate, do some transformation at the government level where the agencies work at the institutional level. Today, we got a Forest Service, a National Park Service, and a Wildlife Service, working the same landscapes in the same ministry without a common vision and common agenda. And if we add the mining and the energy and the fisheries, I mean, we got a big mess around the proper institutional framework. And I start by saying, Manuel, that we will never achieve our 2030 targets with the same institutional framework that in first place created the problem that we want to solve today. So that's another big area that we need to put our attention and begin developing political dialogues so the understanding can generate a transition and a transformation on how we have organized the public sector. And this will bring definitely on board the private sector.
Thank you, Carlos Manuel. Let me take this strong idea. So it is not just about decisions. We can take strong and good decisions in the post-2020 GBF, but that should include actors implementing. That should include a narrative. You have mentioned that it's really, really important to develop that narrative that connects our objective with the economy, with social development. That is something in which probably we are still suffering of lack of, and that is why we are not mainstreaming that into domestic policies. And you also mentioned governance. Probably when we think about biodiversity in many countries, my country, I am Peruvian, you can see different agencies overlapping and strongly disconnected. How can we address that? And we will have 1 more minute for each one of you, and that would be your question, Carlos Manuel, how much through GF you can address that reality, So now, Neville, we are close to celebrate the 50th anniversary, not of you, but of UNEP. It's amazing, 1972. So you have a strong experience of working in environmental topics, including nature, including climate, recognizing that also there are some other agencies working in some of those concrete topics. So based on your experience, Neville, that also used to be just a governmental discussion, now it is a governmental plus non-state plus subnational government. How much this dialogue in between the public and the private can contribute to achieve our objective and to implement our decisions?
Thanks, Manuel, and great to be with you all here today, and of course with the previous panelists as well. As collaboration and partnership to me is at the core of what needs to be done here, and the action agenda really is a fabulous mechanism for bringing that forward. And of course, the action agenda is a part of recognizing the essential contribution of non-state actors to support and alongside state actors to achieve current and future global and national biodiversity ambitions. And we do know from the science about the transformative changes that are needed, such as in food systems and other supply chains we heard about already earlier in the session, to ensure we're on a pathway to living in harmony with nature. And we know that these changes require action across all parts of society and the economy, the kinds of commitments and actions we've been hearing about already today. But we need to be clear that the scale of ambition needed to address the loss of nature requires both these individual actions, but also new and strengthened partnerships across actors to further recognise and champion these actions and support their scaling up by more sectors and across more actors across the economy and society. And the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework really does provide an amazing opportunity to catalyse these commitments and action. And Egypt and China should certainly be congratulated on the foresight they showed with the Secretariat in launching the action agenda at COP14. And in support of the action agenda, we're working at UNEP WCMZ to develop an area-based biodiversity commitments platform to support the action agenda by promoting, showcasing spatially explicit commitments made by non-state actors for the conservation, sustainable management and restoration of biodiversity. And we heard earlier some of the examples of why and how area-based conservation is so important for non-state actors. So, for example, a quarter of global land area is traditionally owned, managed, used, or occupied in some way by indigenous peoples, And that includes around a third of the remaining intact wilderness areas on land around the planet. For protected areas, which of course are a very high topic of interest, private, indigenous and shared governance arrangements make up around 20% of protected areas in Latin America and the Caribbean, more than 30% in North America, about 20% in Africa, 15% in Asia Pacific, and so on and so on. And that's for those which have been reported, but half of areas in Africa don't have their governance reported, and are likely to include many areas which are either shared, private or indigenously managed, and same in other places too. And so if we also consider other conservation areas, then a large proportion of which are likely to be under private, indigenous, local governance arrangements, then it's really clear that meeting any future 30 by 30 target, which is talked about a lot, will absolutely depend on non-state actors. And we need to understand the contribution more and recognise and showcase and celebrate the contribution being made, even for that particular slice of the agenda. So area-based conservation commitments module will promote, showcase these commitments. It will operate seamlessly with the action agenda. It will be a resource to draw on, for example, for the global data being used to track progress towards current and future biodiversity targets. And importantly, it's going to link in with other commitments being made in other initiatives. So initiatives like the Cities with Nature initiative, where I think 175 cities have already made commitments for nature. Commitments under the Biodiversity for Nature initiative, commitments under the UN Decade for Restoration, which of course is launching soon. So to me, partnerships are at the core of scaling up these commitments. They're at the core of our work. They're, of course, a final SDG goal is on partnerships for delivering on the SDGs, and there's certainly a lot more to be done across actors, across all of society and the economy. So I'll stop at that one. Thanks, Manuel.
Thank you, Neville, and thank you for raising this importance of partnership. So unfortunately, we won't have time for a second round. So let's do this. One phrase, each one of you, to encourage who are listening as parties, non-state actors, to work together and to strengthen the nature action agenda, and why it is key to implement what we are going to decide with the post-2020 GBF. One phrase, if you can, because after that we will have back Elizabeth for closing. So Gonzalo, Carlos Manuel, and Neville in that order.
Thank you, Manuel. Cool. I would say we are on a race. This is something that we have to achieve right now. We cannot wait, and we cannot wait not only to stop our emissions, we have to accelerate the capacity of nature to not only sequester carbon, but also restore everything that is related to our own well-being.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Carlos Manuel?
I will say that, Manuel, that we got the science, we got the financial resources at the global level, so we don't have an issue over there. And we got the political commitment. What we need is the right institutional frameworks and the right legal frameworks that can help us implement through actions that political will, as we got the science and the resources at the global and the national levels.
Thank you. And finally, Neville?
Just very quickly, because our success depends on collaboration and depends on action from all parts of society and the economy. There's no one part of society that can deliver on our ambitions alone. Government can't do this alone. Private sector cannot do this alone. Civil society cannot do this alone. We've got to work together for success on biodiversity.
Thank you. Thank you to you, to the three. Thank you to the panelists. A big applause to you all. And join to me to give back the floor to Elizabeth. But before of that, let me close my intervention by saying one thing. It is true what Elizabeth mentioned. It was in 2014 when we launched the Climate Action Agenda. That was the first time ever in which that formal mechanism was launched with that name. And sometimes decisions are based, in my point of view, and I am used to using this phrase, in a combination of knowledge, for sure, the ability to smell the opportunity, faith, a lot of faith, and intuition. So it is not that we don't need to have all in our hands. Sometimes there are a lot of faith and intuition, and that is what I am feeling with the Nature Action Agenda. It is a need for the process, but it is more than that. It is something in which the actors should join, because it is the way in which they will show their responsibility, in which they will show their commitment. So let me finish by encouraging those non-state actors and subnational governments to come into this process, to support this process, no? Not to work in an isolated way, to work together, because it is the way in which we are going to move this planet into sustainability. So thank you to the government of Egypt, for the government of China, for the CBD Secretariat, and also for UNEP and UNEA 5, because we are developing this event as part of the side event of the UNEA 5, for organizing this important event. And thank you to the audience, a very, very big audience. So with this and with my personal thank you, back to you, Elizabeth, for closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuele. Thank you all the distinguished speakers and participants who have joined us today. Indeed, it has been illuminating, and the key message which has clearly come out is one of action by everybody. It can be governments, it can be private sector, it can be NGOs, but literally everybody, all of us, you and me, all involved, be it public or private as the case may be. Clearly, this growing ambition from government, as well as business, civil society, indigenous peoples, local communities, youth, to safeguard, to value, and put nature and biodiversity on a path to recovery by 2030 must continue, and all of us must be heard across all sectors. As we seek to emerge, particularly from COVID-19 crisis, and as we prepare for the new global biodiversity framework, clearly we need to mobilize and connect all voices, leadership in support of the biodiversity agenda, and work to achieve the transformative change. My call to action is to continue to promote systemic transition and engage with all sectors to leverage policies and practices that work with and not against biodiversity. Leadership from the parties, leadership from all of you, all of us, reinforces the political importance of the agenda. And together with non-state actors, it offers new and important opportunity to advance the shared goals and progress during this period of UN Decade for Action, Action for Nature. I invite you all through the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming Action Agenda for Nature and People to make your commitment, to share your actions in support of post-2020 era for nature, people, and prosperity. Without nature, we all know we cannot create the future we want. We know nature is an asset. Nature has value, and Daguspa's report has underlined. Nature is an asset, it has a value. It is time for us all to steer a blueprint for action with opportunities for all sectors and all actors to realize the 2050 vision of the Convention of living in harmony with nature. Our willingness, our determination to act can change the course for nature and for a better, greener future for us all. Thank you all. With this, I thank you all, and we've come to the end of our event. I thank all the participants who have joined us, all the distinguished panelists. Manuel, thank you very much for leading us, for making the event such an inspiring session. We thank everybody, and I hope we are living out here with a promise to each one of us that we will continue to take action, commit, and register our commitments to the action agenda, Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming Action Agenda for Nature and People. Thank you all for your participation and engagement. Thank you.